Euphy is a rank 4 special type pilot. Her first ability is the Undercover Investigation Begins, which is related to the event story. Upon deployment, and every 20 seconds thereafter, this unit has a stealth applied to it. So she cloaks herself, and the stealth of all enemy units within range are disabled. And how does this last for? Upon placement every 20 seconds thereafter. Wait a minute, but doesn't this last for a certain period of time? Doesn't tell you that. That's really weird. Is that a mistranslation? Upon deployment every 20 seconds thereafter, this unit has stealth applied to it, and the stealth of all enemy units within range is disabled. The cloak goes away, and so does the disable. Does it last for 20 seconds? I'll have to look this up later to see how long this actually lasts for, because I'm pretty sure this is not permanent. But if it is, that's be kind of interesting, but I know it's not. Anyways, next effect, stun. Stuns all enemy units within range for 5 seconds every 5 hits. So essentially what that means, in case it's not obvious, if she attacks at one time, I'm pretty sure it's one time, so if you'll see use the Mordred and you attack 3 enemies at a time, I believe that only counts as 1 hit though for this ability. I could be wrong, but in practice that's what I noticed. Anyways, after 5 rounds of that, the next enemy that she hits will be stunned, as it says in range. So there's that. This Euphie is a great example of how not to make a pilot, at least a good one in Code Geass Lost Stories. The problem with this character is that the stats and the abilities are contradictory. As you see here, her attack power is really low, but her abilities require her to be deployed for them to be effective. Obviously, if you want to decloak enemies when they come into range, then you have to be deployed for that to work. If you want to stun enemies, again, you have to be deployed. But when you look at her durability, it's really not that great, and her attack power is not that good either. So if you stun the enemies or you decloak them, chances are you're probably not going to kill them, at least in the stages where you'd want to. For example, the once a month challenges where you have to deal with cloaked enemies, this unit you would think would be a good counter to that, and she is to some extent, but not because she can take out the cloaked enemies, but only because she can decloak them. Even then though, with the low durability, there's a good chance she might get killed as soon as her cloak wears off. And what's also really odd is that they gave her a fast redeployment time, so theoretically you can move around the battlefield and get her deployed as soon as possible with the low cost. It kind of goes together. And they also gave her fast intervals, so you can attack really quickly. But again, if you don't have good durability, you're not going to last long on the battlefield, and that's the ultimate problem with this character. Frankly, they should have just given her one of these effects, not both of them. Buff her stats so she can stun more frequently, or give her a decloak ability on deployment, like what they did with the Code Black character that came out many months after this, which is a much improved version of this Euphie. Now, to their credit, at least they gave her fast interval of attacks, so this effect of stunning should happen more often than not. But again, it's not really going to be something that you're going to use often, and that's the problem with this Euphie. She's very situational. If you're not dealing with cloaked enemies, you're never going to use this character. The stunning ability is significantly inferior to that of Ashford Lucius, because in that case, you deploy him and you get the stun immediately. You get to choose when it happens. With this character, you do not, and that's a problem. So the timing is going to be really awkward. When it comes to decloaking, yes, she can do this, but so can Dalton and Anya. It just depends on what map you're dealing with. Now, like I said, those level 1 challenge, not level 1 challenges, but the week 1 challenges where you're dealing with cloaked enemies, yeah, this can be somewhat useful, but again, you'll have to support her with healers and attackers, otherwise she's going to be a sitting duck. But in cases like arena mode where you are the attacking team, Anya and Dalton are better. When it comes to the defensive teams, however, this Euphie is actually really good because she will decloak enemies that are coming after you. So in theory, you can give her, let's say, the Mordred, and then when your opponent uses, let's say, Halloween Lelouch or something, or DTR, it doesn't really matter, but they cloak certain units, she will decloak them along your range units to take them out. And maybe in this current map, that's not too relevant, but in future ones, that will be. So if you want a good unit for a defensive team in arena mode, as niche as that sounds, she's definitely a good pilot for that. It's very disappointing that this character is not great because the art is fantastic, arguably one of the best Euphie arts in the entire game, but they messed it up with the pilot's design. A clear case of the developers or designers, whoever, trying to put too much into one character instead of just focusing on one thing over another, and ultimately creating something that's just full of contradictions. Kind of like the Jeremiah from before, but even worse than that. And of course, if you're going to summon for this banner, you have to risk the fact that you could summon her over Marrybell, and that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't recommend it. Anyways, let's move on now to the rank 3 character on this banner, Suzaku. Suzaku is a rank 3 healer pilot, and just like Euphy, he also stealths himself, or cloaks himself. 3 seconds after deployment, and every 20 seconds thereafter, he will cloak himself for 17.5 seconds. See how here it tells you how long it is? Again, I'm pretty sure with Euphy, it's not forever. If it were, that would be different. His second ability is a high deployment cost, so he lowers his own deployment cost by 5, and the deployment cost of everyone in the faction by 4. Technically, I think he becomes 6 and 5 if you use a Lancelot or something else that boosts his skill to level 5. This Suzaku is fantastic. Arguably the best pilot on this banner. Well, not this banner, but for this event. Because he is a healer that cloaks himself. He has relatively good stats for a healer, but more importantly, he's got pretty good long-range attack power. So if you combine him, let's say, with the Lancelot Flying Nail version, or the Conquista later on, or whatever knife you want to use, you got a really powerful healer on your hands, again, who can cloak himself. I keep saying it over and over again, but it's really important, that's why. Now, sure, the interval of attack is not that great, but the reduction in deployment cost is because essentially it's either 9 or 10 depending on the skill level, so any nightmare frame you put him in won't be as expensive as it would be for other pilots. Normally I don't really care about this stuff, but in case of Suzaku, where you want him on the battlefield as a healer that cloaks himself, this is really good and very underrated. There are many times you're going to find in the harder missions where you need a healer, but many of them are just too expensive when using the best nightmare frames. With Suzaku, that's not going to be the case. It's one of his best abilities they gave him. Decent balanced attack stats, although obviously long range is the way to go for him, especially in the faction challenges, which by the way, Euphy's not bad for that either, specifically the Royal Family faction challenges, which is coming after the first year anniversary. Although by then you might have better units to use, but just saying that's an option. And with Suzaku, there's also faction challenges, but it's for the Special Corps and Britannia factions. So either way, both of them are really good in those situations. Another great thing about this Suzaku is that he got a really good first year buff where they increased his health and lowered his cost, which is fine. I would have preferred also a defensive buff, but increasing his health is good enough because improving his durability as a healer only sweetens the deal. Euphy, by comparison, I didn't discuss this, but her first year buff was not that great. They lowered her deployment cost, I believe, and that was probably it. But the point is, compared to the two characters, this Suzaku is clearly better. They focused on one element, which is being a healer that cloaks himself with really good stats. That's why Suzaku is great, and it's really frustrating that this event is only going on for 1 week. So if you are a free-to-play player and you're only able to do the hard expedition levels, I don't think it's even possible for you to fully liberate this character by purchasing all the items in the store. I hope to God they fix that, because this Suzaku is going to be the first of many really good rank 3 characters that you can get for free that are meta relevant. Besides that though, awesome character. Now let's move on to Marrybell. The reason why most of you are probably going to summon from this banner, especially if you watch my videos where I demonstrate why that character, or say that pilot, is really broken. Marrybell is a rank 4 strategy type pilot. Her first ability is the Hero Princess Command. Upon deployment, increases the action speed of all Britannia military ally units by 1.7 times and attacks 5 enemy units within range for 6x this unit's attack power. By the way, I believe this is better once the Lancelot trial comes out with the other Marrybell, which is one reason why you might want to go for this character, because they will give us a nightmare frame that boosts her skill to level 5. One important thing to note about this ability is that Marrybell is part of the Royal Family. She's not part of the Britannia military, so if you deploy her, she will not boost her own speed. Just keep that in mind when we look at the other effect, which is Rival Terrorism. Every time this unit defeats an enemy, its nightmare frame skill gauge increases by 30%, and attack power is increased by 21%. Double percents there for 17.5 seconds. Now that means for the first part of this effect, if you destroy 4, you'll go to 100%, so it's not really 30%, it's more like 33%. Not sure why it says 30%. Anyways, doesn't really matter too much. This Marrybell has the same problem as the previous Euphy that we just discussed, where her stats and her abilities are somewhat contradictory, because her first ability is essentially a speed boost for everyone in the Britannia military, but obviously you're going to have to deploy her, withdraw her, and then redeploy her to continually use that effect. But given her high cost, that's not going to be as easy as compared to something like Taizo. So therefore, you're going to have to use Suzaku, the one we just talked about, to lower her cost. She also has a bomb-like ability where you deploy her, she does instant damage like Halloween Jeremiah or Christmas Suzaku, But also, if you kill enough enemy nightmare frames through using that effect, she will then fill up her gauge to 100% and you can unleash another attack on all the enemies. So one half of her abilities is essentially using her as a bomb/speed boost, although you won't use those in the same way because obviously a bomb is way more relevant than giving speed boosts, but I guess it depends on the situation. But the other thing about this character is because she has really high attack power and because she keeps increasing her skill gauge every time she destroys an enemy nightmare frame, you can also just leave her on the battlefield to take out enemy nightmare frames. So it's one of those things where you can't really utilize her skills together. You have to decide if you're going to be speed boosting everyone / killing everyone with a bomb or keep her on the battlefield full time as a ranged attacker. And that's really disappointing because I hate characters that are like that where they have two different play styles and the effects seem to contradict each other, as I said earlier. The other thing about this Marrybell is that for most nightmare frames in the game, it's really hard to utilize the increase the skill gauge ability. As I was testing many times with this character, many nightmare frames in the game now, and even later on, don't have a strong enough skill ability where this effect will be deadly, essentially allowing you to spam, if you will. The only nightmare frames that are really good at this are the ones that have passive charge abilities, like the Gwaine, the Shinkiro, the Gurren flight enabled version. Technically, the Shenhu's melee weapon, I'm sorry, not melee, the range one doesn't have to charge passively, but still has to charge the fire, so we'll count it there. Then, of course, there's the Tristan, the range weapon of that, and so forth. So, for those nightmare frames, she's really deadly because you can keep spamming the attack over and over again. In fact, the Gwaine and the Shinkiro are probably the two best examples. When now the Gurren Satan 8 Elements is probably the best nightmare frame to use if you want to break this character, but before that, you have the Gwaine and the Shinkiro. But for 9% of nightmare frames, you won't be able to utilize her in the same way. So kind of like Angry Suzaku, if you want to break this character, you're going to need a specific nightmare frame that are catered to her abilities to kill lots of enemies and keep refilling the skill gauge. The main problem with this Marrybell is that her second ability is very situational. Obviously the first one is as well because you have to have a team of mostly Britannian forces. But back to the second one, you have to have a map where there's lots of enemies coming at you at the same time, not just having lots of enemies, period. So we're talking like the hard to extra missions. In most cases, she is simply a Winmore. Very fun to use, don't get me wrong, one of the most fun characters in the game, but still a Winmore nonetheless. So what that means is, so you have to use her on stages where you're going to get lots of enemies spawning at you. And because she has really low durability, there's a good chance that when you deploy her, let's say incorrectly or not as efficiently as you could, if you can't spam the skill gauge, there's a good chance she'll just get killed by the enemies. That's the problem with Marrybell. She's really squishy because she's a strategy type pilot and not an annihilator. Now, if they just gave her the skill gauge increase ability and made her an annihilator, well, that would have been really good, but they instead gave her this speed boost ability, which weakens her. And that, of course, also goes for the attacking on deployment, which is a fine ability, but I wish they had focused more on just the skill gauge increase by destroying enemies, maybe give her more attack power and improve her durability. But just like the previous Euphie, they tried two different directions with the character, giving you two different play styles, and ultimately, while Marrybell is a lot of fun to play, she can be very difficult to use, and in most cases, it's probably a Winmore. And for those who have watched my Marrybell spam videos and you assume that she's really broken, just understand those are very niche situations that I put together for your entertainment, when in most cases, that doesn't necessarily happen. So I guess the question then becomes, should you summon from this banner? And my answer to that is, it's really up to you. If you want to have a really fun character in Marrybell, I'd say go for it. But of all the banners we're getting for the Lost Zero arc, this is definitely one of the lower tier, even for event-wise. I think the best character for most situations is the Reign 3 Suzaku, who is free to acquire. And we are going to get the first year anniversary banner, and there's also the Bridesmaid. Those are way better in terms of value. And even the chapter unlimited banners are better than this. In my opinion, I would save for the first year anniversary banner, and then later on when this banner gets reprinted in, let's say, the first year anniversary or something after that, then maybe go for her, especially if you're free to play. If you're a whale, you already summoned her and you don't care what I think. Or not that you don't care, but you're gonna do it anyways. Essentially, if you whale, otherwise I'd say save your resources for another banner. And speaking of the banners for the Lost Zero arc, I actually did a tier list where I ranked all of them, and you can check out that video right here.